Howdy, my friends. My name is Gunnar Clovis. I'm a game developer, and I am here to announce the themes for the Triple Tri Jam 2020. We already have over 130 signups for the jam, which is incredible. I'm so happy to have all of you here. We've had a huge influx in the Tri Jam Discord community. It's been awesome. Everyone's really excited. I'm really excited to see what you guys submit. We also got featured by itch.io, which is really incredible, and I'm so happy about that. We're right next to the GMTK 2020 Jam, which is the week after this jam, which is just incredible, because the Game Maker's Toolkit 2020 Game Jam is the largest game jam of all time, and so being literally right next to it, really, really stupendous. I'm so overjoyed and overwhelmed, but without further ado, here are the three themes for the Triple Tri Jam 2020. The three themes for Triple Tri Jam are chain reaction, negative feedback loop, novel twist on classic game. Remember that these three themes are optional, and you can use them in any way, interpret them however you want. You can use 0, 1, 2, or all three of them. There is a voting metric that the community will decide how well they think you've implemented the themes, but remember, there's no prize for winning first place other than your own smug satisfaction, so don't stress about it. To describe the themes a bit, chain reaction. You know, a chain reaction is a sequence of reaction where the product or byproduct of a reaction causes more reactions to take place, and kind of a positive feedback loop. This is like a Rube Goldberg machine where, you know, one wacky device like a ball rolling down a slide or some kind of trigger, mousetrap, something, causes more things, you know, very kind of master of disguise, silly Rube Goldberg machine. That's one kind of avenue to interpret it. It's also similar to like a domino effect, a long string of physical dominoes knocking each other over one at a time. In a game context, my mind immediately jumps to in some kind of shooter where you have those classic exploding red barrels, and if you have one red barrel that you shoot and explodes and it's next to other red barrels and they just fire off, explode in a line, causing more destruction and chaos. That's one way to interpret it, but definitely you do not have to stick to that kind of route. Be creative, come up with your own unique interpretation, be it for an action game, a puzzle game, story, whatever it might be. A negative feedback loop is not just a game design term, but just a general idea. Positive feedback loop is a little bit easier to understand. A positive feedback loop is a snowball effect. You think of a cartoon snowball rolling down a snowy hill. It gets larger and larger and larger, usually faster and faster over time. In game design, this kind of manifests as when you are winning, it just gets easier to keep winning. And then when you're losing, it gets harder. So this is something you see in games like chess or XCOM. In chess, as you take your opponent's pieces, you have more pieces, you have more options available to you. So the more you win, the easier it is to keep winning, and the more you lose, the harder it is to win. So that's a specific kind of situation. Negative feedback loops, inversely, are taking that same kind of output of the loop into the input, but instead of that with a positive feedback loop, the output of the loop causes it to increase, just kind of an Ouroboros of successive exponential growth. Negative feedback loop, the high output causes the input to shrink. It shrinks itself over time. So this is like a rubber banding effect. So this is more like Mario Kart. In Mario Kart, Nintendo does a lot of work to keep the game competitive with these negative feedback loops. So when you're in first place, you're rocketing ahead. The AI, if you're playing with AI, as with most racing games, will catch up to you a lot easier, a lot faster. They'll have an easier time. But even against other players, if you're in first place, the game kind of does everything in its power to stop you from being in first place, so the race is still kind of competitive. It's very neck and neck. That's because that's a more fun, engaging experience when it's more kind of difficult. If you're in last place in Mario Kart, you can really feel that negative feedback loop where you are given the best and the coolest items. You're given the blue shell and all that kind of thing to try and rocket you from last place to first place, so that there's that kind of ebb and flow. You don't just take an early lead and then just run away with it, because that's just not really fun for the people you're beating, but really even for you if you're rocketing away to first place the entire time. It's better to keep it more competitive. That idea of kind of dynamic game difficulty balancing can be applied to single-player games as well, and just kind of keep the player in a full flow state where when they're doing well, you make the game harder. When they're having a tough time, you make the game kind of easier, so you're maintaining nice kind of trajectory correlation between the player's skill and the challenge of the game. Keep them in that flow state. You can check out my Creating Fun with Pacing and Flow talk for more information on that, how to use the flow state in game design. You can also see Game Maker's Toolkit, Mark Brown's videos on Resident Evil 4 and how they use dynamic game difficulty balancing, as well as his video on feedback loops. Both really awesome. Really recommend that. And finally, novel twist on classic game. This is a pretty easy concept to understand. You see this a lot. This is just taking a very kind of familiar traditional game that we all know, like chess or Pong or Tetris or Pac-Man, or kind of a very traditional first-person shooter or Mario-like platformer, something we're all really familiar with, but especially those like super classic like Atari games, like your Pong and your Tetris, your Pac-Mans, those kind of arcadey games that everyone knows. Taking that concept, that design, and adding your own unique twist, putting some kind of novel twist on the game, making it really special and interesting and innovative and unique to you. One of my favorite examples of this, there's plenty of examples, but actually one of my genuine favorites comes from TriJam. 7KO, or Nanaco, made a game called Triss for TriJam 61. The theme there was negative space, which is my favorite concept in game design. I've been obsessed with it since like 2010 for like a decade. I have multiple public games using that kind of design idea, and 7KO actually used it way better than I did, I feel, for this specific concept. Like, it's just so smart. It's taking a two-player competitive Tetris game where each player is playing opposite colors in each other's negative space. So as you lay down the Tetris pieces, you're carving away from the opponent's space. It's just really ingenious. It works really, really well. It's very pretty to look at. It's very easy to understand from a player's perspective as well. Like, it's just so smart. It's a really, really novel twist on the classic game of Tetris. It's absolutely wonderful. I love that game, that little prototype. I kind of want to clone it myself, honestly, because it's so ingenious. But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Taking a traditional game, an Atari kind of game, and putting your own innovation into it and getting something really interesting. So those are the three themes for Triple TriJam: chain reaction, negative feedback loop, and novel twist on classic game. Use all three, none of them, one or two, however you want. However you interpret them, it's all up to you. Remember that we have a long list of diversifiers as well, which are kind of like sub-themes. They're just kind of fun, optional constraints for a little bit of extra challenge that you can apply to your game. Maybe can give you some extra inspiration or kind of rein in your scope, adding more constraints. Creativity comes from constraints. Look into those and see what kind of jive with you. Definitely can't use all of them, so be selective. On the itch.io Game Jam page for Triple TriJam, we also have a long FAQ. You can check that out. Answer pretty much all the questions I've heard there. Thank you so much for your interest in Triple TriJam. I'm really excited for this jam. Remember, I will make a video on every game submitted to it as long as I can play it. If it's web playable or Windows, or I can find a way, I really want to make a video on all of your guys' games. I'm really excited for it. Please submit to the jam. Doesn't matter how buggy or unfinished your game might end up being in your eyes. It's much better to submit it for your own benefit and everyone else's. You might be surprised that people actually still rather like it. I really, really encourage you to submit whatever you have. You can even submit multiple games if you wish, but please submit something. It'd be really cool to see. And with that, happy jamming.